Hi, welcome to the Hollywood Christian. I'm Stu Cone. I'll be speaking in between interviews conducted by Adam Erickson with Craig Detweiller, author and chair of communications for Biola University, Ralph Winter, Hollywood producer of films such as Star Trek 3 through 6 and the X-Men trilogy, and Phil Cooke, one of the top advisors to churches and Christian media organizations in the area of culture. Let's begin.
So what got you started and interested in the area of Christians in film and multimedia?
Movies have always been my first love. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, I spent hours watching old Bogart movies. And when I heard about Jesus, I thought about Jesus in terms of Bogart. He seemed like Bogart to have his own code of honor, his own code of ethics. He was very loyal to the people who were loyal to him. He had his own sense of style, his own sense of grace, and he always figured out ways to outsmart the authorities.
In your book, A Matrix of Meanings, you focus on the point that there's more to a movie. There's more than just entertainment. There's a deeper meaning. Would you say that applies to the majority of films that are made today?
Well, the best films, I think, appeal to the best of our human instincts. They're about timeless questions about the human experience, about who we are, where we're going, what is the purpose in life. So the artists who make the best films are also asking all the right questions.
Is this something that's developed over time, or is it something that was there since the golden age of Hollywood and even before that?
I think movies have increasingly taken on the role of meaning maker within our society. As the church influence has waned, entertainment and pop culture has risen in its place and has become the locus for discussions about how we live, who we are, what we should be doing, and what it is that we believe.
How would you say this is different than how Christians have done the Christian films that have been done?
Well, I've heard it said that Christian movies are a lot like porn movies. They have bad lighting, lousy acting, and you know how the story is going to end. Anytime that you kind of go into a film with an agenda, whether that's a political agenda, a religious agenda, I think you're compromised as an artist because it's not an honest exploration. You're not going to discover something. You're not going to be surprised by anything. You're going in with a message that you're trying to hammer home. And of course, they always said if you wanted to send a message, you could send a telegram. Why spend $100 million to do that? Movies at their best, I think, leave enough space for us to ask the questions. They leave us room to discover for ourselves where we might fit in the story, and they have endless layers of meaning that draw us back to the film again and again and again.
What's the difference between a film where the meaning is more of a hidden meaning and it's revealed only by the clues that are in the film and not outright stated, or the films that just come out, almost shove it in your face?
Well, I think the best films actually leave more room for the viewer to discover the meaning for themselves. I also think they leave more room for God to enter into that space. You know, sometimes when we try to tie up all the loose ends, there's not really room for the Holy Spirit to awaken people's imagination, to quicken their heart. You know, when I came to Christ freely, not under compulsion. I came to Christ as a choice, not as an obligation. And I think as a filmmaker, we have to leave the viewers with that amount of room, that amount of choice. I also think the best films have room for mystery, for people to discover themselves and to discover God in the process.
More so you'd think that people would prefer to go to a film and almost be involved in the storytelling themselves so that when they leave, they can almost add something on their own?
Well, there's different types of movies. I mean, there's Friday night movies, there's popcorn movies. When you've had a tired week, a rough week, and you just want to laugh, you just want to scream, you just want to have a roller coaster ride of an experience. But then there's Saturday night films where you've had all day to kind of play and to be out and about and think and reflect. And maybe on Saturday night you want to go a little deeper. You want to think a little bit harder. You want something to chew on. You want something that will stay with you. It's a more satisfying meal than just a quick popcorn fix. I think the best films are Saturday night films that lead into Sunday morning. They put us in a place as seekers, as people on a search for something, and I think they can even lead us into that Sunday morning worship experience in a powerful way.
In the case then of movies that are trying to be a Saturday night film, not just entertain the viewer, would you say the viewer is disappointed when the film just comes out and outright states what they're trying to say and doesn't leave any room for the viewer to figure it out?
Yeah. It's a good question. If you look at all the important films, if you look at the films that are the highest rated on IMDb, they tend to be films that are bathed in shades of gray. Things like American Beauty, Fight Club, Magnolia, Donnie Darko, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. All these films leave room for the viewer to discover the meaning for themselves. They cause us to work harder, to dig deeper, and to reflect more on both what the filmmaker is trying to say and how it might connect with our own life and our own spiritual journey.
Do you think Christian films tend to talk down to their audience because they just outright state what they're trying to say and almost don't acknowledge that people kind of want to be able to figure out some things on their own?
I remember the director of Donnie Darko, Richard Kelly, was only about 25 years old when he made the film. And on the director's commentary, he says that he purposely made it mysterious. He could have tied up the loose ends. He could have told people what he meant. And instead, he sort of gave the viewer more credit than that. He challenged his audience to wrestle a little bit more, to go a little bit deeper with his film. And as a result, Donnie Darko confused people when it first came out, but it's one of the most impactful cult films that there is, where people are going back to see it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And I think that's a sign of good art, that it draws you back to it again and again. That every time you watch it, you go a little bit deeper, you see a little something you missed, and you come out hopefully a little bit deeper as a person as well.
Is this something you think Christians should be striving for in their own films, trying to make it more of something that the viewer has to figure out a little more, where there's kind of hints?
Well, I don't distinguish between Christian art and non-Christian art. To me, there's only good movies and bad movies. I'd like to make good movies, and I would assume that most Christians would also want to make good movies. Good movies stand the test of time. Good movies entertain and enlighten at the same time. Good movies inspire people to go deeper, to think more, and to live more boldly. And so that's the kind of films that I want to make as a person of faith, and I am quite positive that there's an entire generation of Christian young people ready to wrestle with life's greatest questions through the most complex and comprehensive art form there is, which is moving pictures.
Well, finally, is there anything that you'd like to add, any sort of thoughts you want to throw out there?
Growing up as a young person in Charlotte, North Carolina, it never occurred to me that I could be a filmmaker. I didn't know anybody in the business. I'd never been to California. And when I came to Southern California, to Fuller Seminary, I was just surprised to discover all types of people in the film business who actually knew less about films and were not as interested in the cinema as I was. So I would say to anybody in North Carolina, in South Carolina, in Georgia, if you love God and you love movies, there's a place for you in Hollywood, in independent film, in the entertainment business.
I want to touch on a particular idea that Mr. Detweiller brought up. And when it comes to storytelling, agenda compromises. Now, a brief clarification on that. Agenda is not the same as a message. A message is a concept or an idea. It has a philosophical merit. Theology doesn't have to be an agenda and works best when it's not. A message can drive a story forward. Characters, like people, operate out of their motivations, their philosophies. You can talk about it, live through it, while an agenda pauses every 5 minutes to say, and this means this because I said so. Agenda is indoctrination, not dialogue, not thinking. An indoctrinated person doesn't know why they believe what they believe, and that is damaging in the end. That said, for a pastor in the pulpit or a classroom teacher, it might not be such a great idea to totally disregard a particular agenda. The job there is to specifically communicate particular things, and in those settings, those things are explicitly Christian. That's what the people are there for. Those are not, however, the only forms of communicating the gospel. They're not even the only ways to teach. They're safe for us because they let us withdraw and demand that the people come to us. We don't have to expend a lot of energy to meet a culture that, let's be honest, is smart, demanding, and intimidating to the moral values and assertions of the Western Church. But art doesn't work that way. Art meets people right where they are and asks them questions. It makes them go through an experience or wrestle through an idea until they come to a conclusion. Metaphor, symbolism, storytelling, they make people associate themselves with things and figure it out. This is how people learn. It's how Jesus taught during his time on earth. In fact, there are around 490 verses dealing with 60 specific and distinct instances of Jesus using metaphor and symbolism. We call it parable. It is also art. Now here's the real issue. We see a lot of awful, immoral things coming out of Hollywood, out of the literary world, on the internet, on television, on and off Broadway, on the magazine rack. And so we want to step away and not be associated with all this bad stuff. Or, instead, we take the track of so clearly distinguishing ourselves from it that when we do engage the media, we end up preaching only to the choir. We become irrelevant in our drive to be not of the world, and in turn lose what it means to be in it. I'm not sure which of those options is the worst one. Both lead to a place where we're saying a lot of stuff, but nobody's listening. That's happening a lot right now. If we're not blasting the industries producing the stuff, we've abused the mediums ourselves in such a way that, let's be honest, guys, much of our material is lame, it's unwatchable, and it is irrelevant. We make programming, but we don't make engaging art that entertains and enlightens, or, as the Greeks put it and Ben Slade is fond of saying, art that pleases and instructs. What art does, what good art does, and I'm using the term art here instead of film or television or theater or literature because art is the core of what drives the best examples of all those mediums. What good art does is it takes a concept and it makes it practical and experiential. It allows those experiencing it in whatever form to go on a journey, to ask the questions of themselves, of characters, of situations, and ideas, and it lets people think. It doesn't talk down to them, it just talks to them, engages them, gives them enough credit to think it through. So what do? We give people credit. And we give God the room to start talking when they start thinking. We start making good art when we start making art with artistic integrity, according to its own systems and structure and abilities to tell stories about what reality is like, with God woven into the fabric of people's lives. We best employ media and the arts when we use its rules to talk to people about ideas and philosophy. We make bad art when we just connect the dots and leave no room to breathe or interact with the material. We do that a lot. Agenda compromises. It also suffocates. But a message, that breathes.
Around a year before Narnia was released, you were working on the Screwtape Letters, and one of the quotes you had said was that you were trying to convince the studio, Fox, to pursue producing this film. And one of the big kickers was depending on how Narnia had done. Well, since Narnia has done really well in theaters and all around the world, has there been any progress in getting that to the silver screen?
There is some movement on that. We're in the deal negotiation stage right now, so it's all tentative. The rights don't exist in one place by themselves. But what we're doing now with Doug Gresham, the stepson of C.S. Lewis, and Randall Wallace, who wrote Braveheart, we're talking about Randall writing and directing that. We're talking with Walden about providing some financing, as they did with Narnia. And we're talking to Fox about distributing. So it's all very tentative, and it's all in process now.
During the same time, you had said that you had seen the film as being more of an R-rated type of film due to the content. How do you balance content that may be deemed objectionable and telling the story in the most efficient manner using the content?
Well, I think with Screwtape Letters in particular, I think the gravity of the story about temptation, about the battle of good and evil, it may be warranted to be an R-rated movie. And I'm not afraid of that. I've made R-rated movies, and I think if the story warrants it, then it's worthwhile. There's a warning that comes with an R-rated movie, that it is only for adults over 17. So, but it depends on the story material if it warrants that.
What are your thoughts on film including anything that, in order to tell the story?
Yeah, I think that, you look at all the elements that go into telling a film, telling a story on film, whether they're gratuitous or whether they're necessary. I guess it's possible to make a story about the mafia, and they could say, gosh darn it, to each other. That may or may not have the same credibility and authenticity to the audience. But look, I think as Christians, we can't be afraid of that. If you're afraid of R-rated material, I would warn you about reading parts of the Bible. It's R-rated. David goes out and takes 10,000 foreskins. I mean, that's probably an R-rated movie. Hard to get around that in terms of if you were going to try to put that on film. But even reading some of that stuff and about the inadequacies and the stumblings and faults of characters and heroes in the Bible that are, just like us. They got the same kinds of problems, and, some of our greatest heroes are ones that have killed people. So life's R-rated. We can't be afraid of that. But I think we need to be responsible in the way we go about it and the way we tell stories.
Would you say that the visual element is a little stronger than reading words on a page?
Sure. I mean, the visual element is much stronger. That's what makes movies and storytelling much more powerful. That also means that our responsibility is greater. And that should be okay. As Christians, we should be held to a higher standard about, what that impact's going to be on the culture. That's why you depend on filmmakers, hopefully, with integrity.
What would you say about those that say there really shouldn't be any objectionable material included in a film? I've often heard in this topic, like the weaker brother argument brought up, that you shouldn't necessarily do anything that would cause your weaker brother to stumble. And I've heard a lot of people say the same thing about a content in a film, that you should keep it as non-objectionable as possible so that all may see whatever you're trying to tell.
Well, I'd probably want to go back and look at that passage. It'd be an interesting study to do and see what Paul was getting at there. Even in the phrase that you used there about that all could see what you were doing, it depends on who your audience is. Look, I don't think we should be afraid of stuff that might not reach everybody. I think Jesus, in telling parables, knew exactly who his audience was, knew about how to use subtext, was not afraid of telling stories that were a little dark. And a lot of those stories rarely have happy endings. He talks about how, if your eye is sinful, to pluck it out, and better to go into heaven one-eyed than to go with both eyes into the fire of Gehenna. It's pretty dark about guys wandering around with one eye hanging out, or, I mean, there's plenty of stories like that are not, we've glossed over them in our sort of westernized Christianity, but I'm sure those stories had a lot of impact when they first came out, when Jesus first told them in the first century. So I think we, again, minimize the artistic integrity of filmmakers by suggesting that everything needs a happy ending, everything needs to be viewed by everyone. I don't know if I want to live in that kind of world. Art is, be it visual art, be it storytelling art. Flannery O'Connor's stories were not embraced by everyone in the literature world or in the Christian world. Art's meant to ask questions and to stimulate thought and to create reflection and stimulate discussion and argument. So making it acceptable to everybody, I'm not sure I want to be in that place.
When it comes to deciding what is acceptable for a film, how much of the responsibility lies with the filmmaker and how much with the audience when it comes to determining this is good for either me to make or for me to see, depending on which side of that?
Well, okay, that's interesting. I think, as a filmmaker, we have a responsibility to the story and the truth of the story. How are we going to do that in a way that is most impactful, that is going to get the intent of the story across? And so you've got to rely on again, as we said, the integrity of the filmmakers to be responsible in that. And, you know, somewhat you're dependent on those critics are sort of one layer of measuring that for you. And I think on the other side, as a viewer, reviews and critics can be one layer, but you find a measurement that you trust. Maybe it's your friends, maybe it is a reviewer, maybe it is a particular filmmaker that, gee, no matter what Randall Wallace makes, I'm going to go see what he makes. I think you come up with a grid that you can use to determine the kinds of movies that you want to see and want to consume. Maybe you don't ever want to consume an R-rated movie. That's fine. There's a grid that you're set up that you've decided. Maybe you only want to see movies made by Christians. Well, there's a grid. There's something you can measure against. I think everybody develops that grid, at least responsible parents and responsible viewers. It gets back to our sort of individual responsibility about what we're going to consume.
What would you like to say, and I know earlier you said that some people might set up a grid where they decide automatically they don't want to see an R-rated movie. Is there anything you'd like to say to that sort of audience? I read an interview with you where you were saying a lot of people will dismiss a film like American Beauty, saying that it just because of the overlying content of it and the R rating. But if you look down deeper, there's such a greater story there that's being told. Right. Is there anything you'd like to say to that sort of audience, just to give that point of view of why it might be okay to see the R-rated film?
I think there's so many good movies being made, and there are some, not all, there are some that are R-rated that are worth exploring for the issues and the way those characters and those journeys are presented. And we can't dismiss those just because we think it doesn't fit our nice Christian way of thinking and believing. I think if we're going to be responsible Christians and engage the culture, some of those R-rated movies we may need to see so that we're able to engage at a deeper level. You know, I'm not an advocate to say that you have to go see Brokeback Mountain, but if you want to work in the Hollywood community and engage with those who are part of the gay community, I'm not sure how you can engage without having seen that movie and know what that story is about and why that story has power and why Hollywood embraced that story in the way that it did. So, but if you're living, you know, outside the Hollywood community, and you may have no need to see that and no need to embrace or dialogue deeper on that issue. I don't know. It depends on where you are. But you know, I don't know why we're afraid of doing that, of engaging on those movies. The argument that comes up a lot of times in opposition to that is, look, why isn't Hollywood making more movies that are clean and that, you know, like old-fashioned Hollywood movies? And the answer is they are being made. You may not see them, you may not hear about them, maybe you're not working hard enough to find them, but those movies are getting made. I've made some of those. It's hard to get the word out because of the noise level that's out there for all the other commercial studio product, but there's a lot of good movies out there. And there's websites, Christian sites, that are seeking those out and finding them and talking about those. So unless you've done your homework, it's a little disingenuous to say, oh, Hollywood's not doing this. Because Hollywood's made up of a lot of family executives, and they want some of those movies made, and they are getting made. So you need to look a little harder.
Is there anything you'd like to say to Christians out there who are either wanting to get involved in Hollywood or who don't necessarily feel called to Hollywood but want to be praying for the Christians that are in Hollywood? What can they be praying for, or what can they be doing to be getting involved?
Well, I think that if there's Christians that want to actually work in the media business, there's a lot of different kinds of opportunities. And one shouldn't think that the only opportunity is to work on a studio movie at a studio lot in Los Angeles. You know, there's just so many varieties of opportunities out there, from building viral videos on the internet, to doing commercial production, to doing industrial production, to producing short movies for churches and for discussion, and people are making a business out of it and making a good living. Everybody's telling stories. There's so many out there, it's incredible, and I think that part of it's exciting. So there's lots of opportunities. I think inside of Hollywood, where it's very competitive on the front lines, there's certainly a need for, and there are a lot of people that pray for Christians in Hollywood. And I think, those folks need to be there. It's salt and light, and they need and appreciate the prayer support they get. I know I do.
Is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't touched on that you might want to get out there said, or just any last thoughts?
Look, I think there's just a great opportunity for Christians to be involved. I think we need to encourage not only young people, but anyone who wants to interact with culture to get involved with media and arts in their local churches. And there's a place you can make a difference in your local church. You don't have to come to Hollywood to make a difference. Storytelling has become a more and more powerful tool, and we should be figuring out how to use that in our local church, as well as how to influence people to go to the theater. So there's opportunities right in front of you. You have no excuses. The cameras are not expensive. You can borrow them. You can borrow an iMac and edit it with software from someone else. If you have talent and you have a...
Life is R-rated. Deal with it. Christian art is more often than not sugar-coated, sinless breakfast cereal. It's philosophical Frosted Flakes, but with more sugar and even less nutrients. It's that misunderstanding of what it means to be in the world, but not of it, with all the irrelevance that comes with that. To portray life in unrealistic terms is lying to your audience, and they know when they're being lied to. Am I proposing that all Christian art should be adult in nature and R-rated? No, I'm not. Know your audience and know your story. In script writing, there's a rule about the content of your script. If it doesn't move your story forward, don't do it. If you're working on a family-oriented drama comedy, you know where to draw your lines, but if you're writing for a mass adult audience dealing with hard issues, and by the way, we should be the people willing to tackle the hard issues, you've got to talk to them like adults. You've got to let the issues come down hard on your characters. Otherwise, they don't really go on a journey, and your audience disengages. Know who you're talking to and talk to them as who they are. Integrate enough reality into your fiction that it's relevant to the viewer. If it isn't relevant, you're not teaching anything worthwhile, and they won't learn anything worthwhile. The key here is Christians learning to be honest with reality, honest with ourselves, and by the way, honest with the world. If you went out on a street corner and began to preach that the emotional impact of terrible things is sugared up by Jesus, sooner or later someone will walk by who's experienced whatever event you're denying, and they will kick you in the face, and you'll have earned it. Christian art does it all the time, or worse, it glosses over whatever issue it's trying to deal with, and then tries to offer a way out that looks downright magical or instant. People know better than that. We try to clean stuff up on our own. We do it all the time, but we fail to realize that our job isn't to do the cleaning. That's the Lord's job. Our job is to be honest, say that sin screws things up. It hurts people. It destroys lives. That the pain and dysfunction that people go through every day is legitimate. They're not alone. We're just as bad, just as sick, but we can point them to the physician. We've got to start being honest when we employ media to talk to people. We've labeled what we have to say as Christian and built up false fences around what that means. We almost sound like we're talking about some kind of alternate reality in our drive to appear fixed and cleaned up. This is the opposite of the approach that our scriptures take, by the way. It's honest about the fact its characters are sinners. It's honest about how sinful they could be. It's not so much that we have to convince most people that they're sinners. I think most people can turn on the news and figure that out. The task is to just be honest with them about that which is already apparent. It isn't magic. Welcome to humanity. But there's a way that's a unique journey. It'll change you, transform you, help you to see the world differently. the way it was created, and what it's worth to God, what you're worth to God. It won't be sugar-coated, and you won't be perfect while you're here, but you can start getting better from the soul on up. It's free, but it's a journey. It's growing, it's learning. You don't have to be sugared perfect. Beat up and burdened is a fair place to start. That's a powerful message, because it is honest.
At the origin of Hollywood, why would you say that Christians steered clear of the medium?
Actually, at the origin of the film industry, they didn't. In fact, the first feature-length film ever made, if I recall, was in 1898, which was the story of Oberammergau, the Passion Play, in Germany. And so the fact is, in the early days of cinema, in the 1910, 1920 era, churches were some of the biggest producers of movies there were. So in the early days of film, the church was very involved in the industry, and they produced a lot of stuff. It was only later, once the maybe in the 40s and 50s, the Catholic office had a film office that created something called the Hays Code. It was kind of these are the rules: no smoking, no drinking, no lewd activity, no sexual content in films. And in the 40s, 50s, and particularly into the 60s, the Hays Code started getting pushed aside. And as films got more and more sexual, as they got more graphic, as they got more violent, churches and ministries and Christian organizations kind of took a step back. And so the fact is, we really vacated that territory. We gave it up. And I think, and one of the reasons when I'm interviewed on news magazines or talk shows or conferences and things like that, I always say that the movie business and the television industry is where it is because of us. It's our fault. Because as Christians, we gave up that. We gave up that territory in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we walked away. And anytime you vacate territory, the enemy's going to come in there. So I think that's a huge reason why the entertainment industry is in the situation it's in. So I think it's up to us to reclaim that and take it back.
Why would you say that they did vacate at that time then?
I think they felt like the movie industry was going in a direction they couldn't stop. And also, it was at a time, I think, in that period after the war, that there were a lot of distractions. And that's really where, in many ways, popular culture was born in the way we know it today. After the war, there were miracle prefab homes, miracle drugs, there were miracle appliances. It was an incredible time to be alive. And there were so many distractions for most people. And so they started going in a lot of different directions. And I think the church just kind of retrenched itself and decided that entertainment and movies and television weren't areas they really wanted to focus in. And so it wasn't until really relatively recently, I mean, when I was in college in the early 70s, in mid-70s, Christians did films, but they were very didactic. They were very teaching-oriented, very explicit. The Billy Graham films, for instance, are famous for having an altar call at the end. And no matter how convoluted it makes the story, the hero has got to get to a Billy Graham crusade and accept Christ at the end. So it didn't work story-wise. And they made nice church films, but that was the focus of the church. And it wasn't until relatively recently that Christians have really gotten involved in a higher level in the industry to make really films that matter.
What sort of things are Christians doing now to sort of take back the territory that was lost and just to have an impact in Hollywood?
There's really two types of media that I'm involved in and that a lot of different Christians are involved in. One is what I would call explicitly Christian media. That would be Christian television, what you see on TV. Films that are still explicit, Christian radio. Those are fine, and I think Christians ought to have an outlet in the media to do particularly focused Christian, explicitly Christian things. We can discuss deeper levels of the faith and deeper truths about the faith, and we should do that. However, the problem with that is it also creates a ghetto, if you will. It separates us in a bubble from everybody else. We do the Christian thing, and we start losing our impact in the mainstream culture. So that's why a number of Christians have decided to forego what we would call explicitly Christian media and go directly into the mainstream world. And so today we have Christians at remarkably high levels at Fox, for instance, 20th Century Fox. We have them at Sony. We have them at Warner Brothers. We have them in a number of different places around town that are working themselves into situations where they can start making significant decisions. So that is kind of the theory there, is working it from the inside, trying to make a difference. And like many people, Ralph Winter and others might say, they can't make huge decisions on films as far as the content. They can't make a character a Christian, or they can't, do an explicitly Christian scene. However, they are indirectly and subtly able to guide the film away from certain directions and focus it on others that might be more positive.
Do you think the explicitly Christian productions are more so missing the mark?
The explicitly Christian productions you see on most Christian television and a significant part of Christian radio are not only missing the mark, they are out of the ball field entirely. I think Christian television is awful for the most part, and that's where I make my living to a great extent. We have one company, Cooke Pictures, that is a consultant and a producer for some of the largest churches and ministries in the country. And our greatest goal is to raise the bar in the quality and effectiveness of what Christians do. I mean, you got to admit, most people look at Christian television and think, what in the world is that? And the fact is, Christian television and Christian media in general has come a long way. It used to be really, really awful. Today it's just moderately awful. And, but they're people that mean well. They just, historically in Christian media, we've gotten the content right. That's the great thing. We've gotten the content right, but it's a packaging issue. We don't know how, Christians have historically not understood how to package great content to make somebody want to watch it. You've got to have great content, but you also have to package it in a really compelling way. And that's one of the reasons most of my work has been trying to move us from the era of TV preachers to the era of TV producers. I want the creative focus and the drive to come from behind the camera. Because when that happens, we start going beyond just doing preaching shows, which, are a dime a dozen. There's a million preaching shows on television. And the fact is, here's something interesting to think about. That is that the secular television, the networks, they want to make money. They're not anti-Christian. They are not anti-Christian. There are certainly people in high levels of Hollywood that don't like Christians, but the networks want to make money. That's what they're all about. And if preaching shows generated a big audience, they'd be in prime time on ABC and NBC, trust me. So if they don't like it, why are we doing it so much? So I say we need to create a generation of creative producers that will create documentaries, music shows, TV specials, movies, even game shows. Why can't we explore all the avenues and genres of TV to make it much more interesting and compelling?
Do you think that if we were to go into such genres as are you thinking more specifically Christian, or just Christians producing and having an impact in that area?
I think both ways. I think, number one, we need to raise the bar in the quality of explicitly Christian shows. When your local church produces a program or a ministry, whether it's Joel Osteen in Houston or Joyce Meyer in St. Louis or Billy Graham in Minneapolis, no matter who it is, Ed Young Jr. in Dallas or Charles Stanley in Atlanta, whatever they do that's explicitly Christian, we need to keep on a journey to raise the bar, to make it more relevant to audiences, to make it more contemporary, to make it something that anybody would understand and relate to. On the other hand, we ought to also be training a generation of young people who would go to work at Fox, who would go to work at NBC, who would go to work at ABC. Because can you imagine if we had a legion of young Christians who were moving into the entertainment industry in huge amounts? David McFadzean, who is the producer of Home Improvement, has a great suggestion, and that's if we could raise up 100,000 production assistants, just PAs, to go into Hollywood and start, they'd filter up through the system, and it would make a huge impact 5-10 years from now. So I think that we need to be thinking on both tracks. I think we need to do explicitly Christian programming. That's fine with me. We just need to do it better. But we also need to be seeding people into the secular industry to have an impact there.
Why do you think we as Christians up until now haven't had a very high production value on things that we've produced?
Up to this point, Christians have not made much of an impact as far as production values for a couple reasons. Number one, we haven't been trained. Most guys, if you're a church media director in Des Moines, or if you're a ministry media director in Atlanta, you don't have many models. Where do you go for training? What do you do? So most church media directors or ministry media directors that are trying to produce explicitly Christian programming, they don't have many places to learn. Only now are Christian colleges really catching a vision and training young people to be proficient in film and television. So it's been education to a great extent. There's only been a handful of us that have been at it for 20 or 30 years that have come a long way. The second thing is the content issue. You know, we've always been good with the content. We know the message we've got down. The problem is we don't do a good job packaging that message. We don't create an environment. We don't understand how the impact lighting makes. We don't understand the impact directing makes. You know, directing is much more than just lining up 3 or 4 cameras in front of a preacher and just randomly cutting between them. There's a real art to it. And so directing is key. Makeup, lighting, all those areas that are really critical on TV, we've got to pay attention to that stuff. And the fact is, the television audience today is incredibly sophisticated. They've been watching television their whole life. And believe me, if they're not engaged, if they're not interested, they'll switch. There's plenty of other options. In a 500-channel universe, there's 499 options to your show. So you've got to justify what you're doing. You know, when Paul, in Acts 17, when Paul went to Mars Hill and started engaging the philosophers, he had to justify their attention. He had to show them that he understood their culture, he understood their religion, he understood what they were about, and he respected them. And so I think to a great deal, we have to show the audience that we respect them. And when we do that, then they'll watch.
What do you believe is the best way that Christians can be affecting Hollywood? I know you said the PA filtering up. What about those that want to be, how can they be preparing for such a role? Okay.
Christians will really start to make an impact in Hollywood when churches understand that Hollywood is a mission field. There's a joke out here that churches and ministries will, you know, they'll raise up missionaries to go reach half-naked heathen in third world countries. Well, why not reach half-naked heathen in Beverly Hills? There's plenty of those out there. We've got to change our thinking and understand that the entertainment industry, Hollywood if you will, is a mission field. And what's interesting is we boycott Hollywood. You know, a film comes out like the Da Vinci Code that we don't like, and people boycott, they protest, they get upset. What's interesting is when we go to a third world country, we go to Africa for instance, and send a missionary to Africa, he goes into a village, what does he do? He doesn't boycott, he doesn't hold up signs criticizing the village, he doesn't protest and get upset with them. What does he do? He wins their trust. He develops a relationship with them. He wins their trust, and over a long period of time, he gets to understand them, they get to understand, and it makes an impact. In Hollywood, though, we go and protest and criticize and boycott. So what we've got to understand is we've got to view Hollywood as a mission field. We're never going to make an impact in the entertainment industry until we can develop a relationship of trust. So number one, we've got to build those bridges and make them understand. You know what? I've never met a single person that was won to Christ by humiliating him, by shaming him, by embarrassing him, by intimidating him. That's not the way you win people to Christ. You win people to Christ by starting a conversation, and you develop a relationship of trust. And so we've got to learn to do that with Hollywood. And if we can do, our problem is, as Christians, we boycotted so much that we become known as the people who are against everything. And we've got to become known as the people who are for something. And if that can happen, we can really make an impact.
What is the best thing that Christians outside of Hollywood can be doing then that want to have some sort of impact within Hollywood but don't necessarily feel called to come to Hollywood?
Good question. If you're a Christian and you want to have an impact in Hollywood, even though you're not an actor or a director or you don't feel called to go to Hollywood, a couple things you can do. Number one, you can pray. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that Christians underestimate the power of prayer. If we had an army of people praying for Hollywood out there across the country, you'd definitely see an impact. We've got to take it seriously and pray for Hollywood. There's a number of ministries that help you do that. Prayer is a hugely important thing. Another thing to do is encourage your church to have have small groups to look at movies. I really encourage pastors to help their congregation understand how to use the media. You may not be a professional media person, but you deal with the media every day of your life. You watch movies, you watch television. I mean, think of this. Your alarm clock goes off, music starts playing, you listen to the radio when you get up, you watch the news when you're getting dressed, you go to work, you listen to the radio in the car. I mean, first thing you do is turn on your computer when you get to the office. So media is a part of our life almost every waking minute. And yet Christians know remarkably little about how to deal with it. How do our kids, what do we tell our kids about internet filters? What do we tell our kids about behavior with MySpace and other kind of things on the internet? We need to do a better job of teaching believers how to deal with the media. What's too much? You know, it's interesting that George Barna's research indicates that Christians' viewing habits on television is absolutely identical to non-Christians' viewing habits. That's pretty pitiful. The average American family today watches 4 hours of television a day, plus another hour on the internet. That's a huge impact. And I tell pastors whenever I'm teaching in pastors' conferences that you may be reaching your congregation for 1 hour, 2 hours, maybe 3 hours at the most a week, but your congregation is watching television 4 hours a day. Who's going to have the biggest impact and influence? So we really got to teach, I think, our congregation more about how to deal with the media and help them understand those kind of things.
How then can Christians be using multimedia productions within the church to impact their communities?
One of the most exciting things happening out there is how churches are embracing media. And whether it's putting the lyrics of the worship songs up on the screen, whether it's showing little clips, introducing a sermon. And we work with a lot of the largest churches in the country, helping them. In fact, I was at a meeting this morning with a big church talking about some sermon starter segments. We're going to do some short 2-minute videos for a series they're getting ready to do called Unleashed. And the pastor is going to be teaching about how God can unleash you from all the obstacles you face in your life, how God can release you from all the bondage and the things that you've obstacles and frustrations you've dealt with throughout your life. And so we want to open that message with a series of videos that are going to demonstrate very graphically what it means to be unleashed. And so that's a great way you can do it. So there's a lot of tools. There's really a lot of tools that a church can use. And I'm very excited that they're finally recognizing it's a powerful thing. We're a media-driven generation. Research indicates that by the time an average teenager is 18, they've already seen 100,000 beer commercials alone on television. What kind of impact does that have? If we don't counter that impact, then we're going to lose this generation.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on that you would really like Christians out there to hear?
If there was one thing I could say to Christians about technology, about the media, about the entertainment industry, it would probably be that as believers, we need to understand the power of change. The gospel never changes. The Bible says Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But everything else changes. Culture changes, people change, trends change, times change, styles change. Everything else changes. Christians tend to get bogged down. They believe, well, if God never changes, I should never change. And historically, the biggest battle we fought with churches and ministries is getting them to understand the power of change. And if we're going to be relevant, if we're going to be something that non-believers will look at and say, I want to be like that, we've got to embrace change. It happens. And so we need to understand what the trends are in the culture, what people are thinking, where they're going. Doesn't mean compromise. It doesn't mean that we chase the culture, but we have to recognize and respect the changes that are happening. And if we do that, we will be much more open to be producing programming, to be creating media, and just generally as a church, be much more responsive to the culture.
We didn't lose Hollywood in a culture war. We vacated the space willingly, and then we got mad because people like us weren't still there making stuff we liked. So now we find ourselves totally outside the ball field, trying to produce cheap programming that's just a step above bad local used car commercials. And we're taken just as seriously. It's become about numbers instead of people at the root. The symptom is everywhere in our communicative overtures, from lame signs with lame yet sometimes charming jokes outside of our churches, on up to a subpar use of the media and the arts to reach a media and arts-driven generation. That's kind of backwards. We also don't like to commit to the arts, to the work necessary to do them well. And those who are willing to commit are often left with no outlets because the church is trying to keep itself at arm's length. We get so caught up in the definition of a true missionary that we forget the underlying status we all share in Christ, ambassador. That means that we represent the kingdom of God no matter where we are or what we're doing. We represent the God of the universe at all times. He deals in reality, and so should we. He demands quality. We should settle for nothing less. Not everyone is a pastor. Not everyone is an artist. That's okay. If you are an artist or a media specialist capable of supporting artists, you need to understand your craft and all of its communicative abilities and functions inside and out. And just as we should support every other member of the body of Christ, we need to encourage and support those trying to represent us with all the grit and beauty that honestly speaks of the life we've taken on. Being in the world and out of it doesn't mean running away from things being abused for sinful purposes. It also doesn't mean we get to abuse the same mediums to misrepresent reality ourselves. It does mean handling everything we touch in a redemptive fashion. Mediums are just mediums, they're just tools. But they can be powerful when purposed correctly by people willing to use them to their truest potential. Artists, do that. Do it well. Everyone else, support them. They'll support you. To fail to engage the media and engage it well is a fundamental failure in the evangelistic philosophy of the American church. It's time to create material with such depth and quality that in the next 5 years, people might come across a television show or a movie produced by Christians and put the remote down. If we cannot stand out in a 500-channel universe, how can we even hope to compete with the millions of other everyday idols in our culture? There are millions of intelligent, sophisticated people out there, especially in the American culture. They deserve the same effort and cultural understanding as the naked heathen in a densely populated jungle. There are churches on every corner, but not all using the name Jesus or introducing people to Christ. If you are artistically gifted or gifted in technological media work, I implore you to develop those gifts. Be what you're wired to be, and be that to the glory of God. And you will have one of the strongest voices in the world to come. Thank you.